Yes, so as Mike said, I'm going to be talking about climate change and rates of crocodylomorph body size evolution. Climate change obviously is an extremely important and concerning issue for everybody, and crocodylomorphs, it would seem, are the perfect group for studying its effects on large-scale evolutionary processes. Before I start, I've got some thank yous to hand out, most of all to Mike for supervising the project and putting up with me and my crazy ideas, to Emily and Graham for all their fantastic advice and suggestions on my thesis, and to Armin, Tom and Mark for teaching me some of the methods. Also, last but not least, to NERC for funding the project, which is very nice if you can get it. So the crocodylomorphs, on this slide there is a picture of every crocodylomorph in existence today, give or take one or two. There's a debate about, which is it, this chap here, the dwarf crocodile. Some people think it might be 2 species, others think it's just 1. So there's about 24, 25 give or take in total. On there it might look like a lot, but in the grand scheme of things that's really not very much, because the common ancestor of all modern crocodiles first appears in the Cretaceous period, but the crown group archosaurs, so crocodiles and birds, first appears in the Triassic, and the sister group, the birds, have achieved a diversity of over 10,000 species in the same amount of time. So crocodiles, they're really a bit pathetic, really. There's just not very many of them. And the diversity is also not very high either, the morphological diversity, that is. They're all aquatic, they all look kind of basically the same, they're all amphibious, ambush predators, with long noses and long tails. So the diversity is quite low, and that's sort of, why is that? That's really quite weird. Actually, the geographic distribution is also quite limited. They're constrained to a band about 30 degrees north and south of the equator, and that seems to be related to temperature, because of course they're ectotherms, they have no control over their body temperature. So they're limited to regions of the planet which are warm enough to sustain them. Now that's in stark contrast to what you see in the fossil record. Yes, we do find in the fossil record sort of familiar things like this in the top right, crown group crocodiles, as I say, they appear in the Cretaceous period, but there's other types of crocodylomorph, I should say, in the Mesozoic, which are a lot less familiar. We have thalattosuchians like this one, highly derived ocean-going crocodiles with fins and flippers, and then we have these strange sort of almost mammal-like notosuchians, heterodont. Some of them might have been herbivores, quite alien creatures by comparison. And we also see cursorial forms like these two at the bottom. This is a rather primitive one from the Triassic, but high-walking, hypercarnivorous crocodylomorphs appear in the fossil record of South America as recently as the Eocene. So we've got this much broader spread of diversity. But crocodiles, they have this blessing. A lot of them live in water, and many of them have tough body parts like reinforced skulls and osteoderms. So as fossil vertebrates go, their fossil record is actually pretty good, which makes them excellent subjects for studying large-scale evolutionary processes. So some of you might remember this painting that appeared in the news earlier in the year. This is Machimasaurus rex, and one of its outstanding features is that it's pretty big. It's larger than any crocodile you see today. And this is an ongoing theme you see in the fossil record, that body size is much more variable in fossil crocodiles than it is today. So we have this enormous thalattosuchian from the Middle Jurassic period over here, and then by contrast we have this basal one, this Terrestrisuchus found in Gloucestershire, just tiny. It's only the size of a cat. So you see this enormous variation, much wider disparity in body size than you see today. Body size is really important because it affects all manner of different aspects of ecology, things like physiology, the rate at which it grows, the rate at which it can reproduce, its geographic range, the size of its population, all sorts of things. So it's quite an important question. Why is there so much more variation in the past than there is today? Body size is an attribute which can be ascribed to anything. It's not like certain characters which are present or absent. Everything has a body size, so it's an attribute you can measure for everything. And also, you don't need a complete specimen to measure body size. You just need a relative proxy, something conservative that doesn't change very much. And for the purposes of this study, I have assembled a data set of about 190 measurements of skull width. The skull width seems to be quite limited in how much variation it has with body size. Now, if we plot body size through time for crocodylomorphs, I've gone from the lowest Jurassic because that's where the fossil record starts being good enough you can actually do it. You can plot body size through time, and underneath here, these dots here, these are delta 18O values, so it's a proxy for temperature. It's a little bit counterintuitive because delta 18O is reversed. So the more negative it is, it's actually warmer. So these points correspond to cooling through the Cenozoic. So it's relatively low temperatures today, warmer in the Mesozoic, which is sort of what we all understood. But as you can see, there's actually quite a strong correlation between body size and temperature. And that might seem counterintuitive when we think of the giant crocodiles from the Mesozoic, things like Sarcosuchus and Deinosuchus, these enormous dinosaur-sized crocodiles. But actually those giant crocodiles were sort of bucking the trend. And many of the largest crocodylomorphs in the fossil record are actually from sort of the Miocene onwards, things like Purosaurus, Gryposuchus, Euthecodon. Even the modern saltwater crocodile is one of the largest that's ever existed. That's this guy down here. So my question is, are we able to look at this in a more sophisticated way to see if this trend is actually real? And sort of what's going on with it. So I wanted to look at this in a comparative phylogenetic context. Comparative phylogenetics allows us to estimate trait trajectories by reconstructing common ancestors and projecting character states through time. And it would be looking at it in terms of evolutionary rates, that is phenotypic change per unit time. And to do this, you need to have a phylogenetic hypothesis of, in my case, the entire crocodylomorpha. That's actually not a small task. So what I've done is assemble what's called an MRP supertree. MRP being an acronym for matrix representation parsimony. And it's the best method because others are simply not practical at this scale. Supermatrices accumulate huge numbers of inapplicable characters. For example, lots of matrices use characters from osteoderms of crocodiles, and lots of crocodylomorphs don't have osteoderms, so you just end up with these big blocks of question marks in a supermatrix. And they become so cumbersome that branch support is very low if you're using parsimony, and Bayesian analyses simply never converge. They just won't find a satisfactory answer. And also Bayesian supertree approaches, they're not particularly widely used, but there is a way of doing Bayesian supertrees. But in the same way, it takes a very, very long time to actually reach any kind of convergence or consensus on a tree. So MRP was the only practical way of doing this. Essentially, it works by taking published trees and then deconstructing them into a matrix of virtual characters. That is, so each node on a source tree becomes a character. So in this top tree here, there's a character which is common to alligators and crocodiles, and then those two taxa are encoded as the character being present on the matrix and then absent in all the others. And then you can reanalyze this matrix to produce a single tree. Now, I did this in TNT, and I've evaluated the relative effectiveness of each supertree using this equation. This is the Steele and Enrigo formula, and it essentially compares each of the winning supertrees with the source trees, and the tree which has the greatest in common with its own source trees is actually the best supertree, and that produces a phylogeny. Now, this is where it gets a little bit more interesting, that I've taken this phylogeny and the body size data I mentioned before, and I've brought them together into a phylogenetic model. I've used two different pieces of software for this. I've used Bayes traits and Geiger. There's a wider diversity of models established in Geiger at the moment, and actually at the time I was using an older version of Bayes traits which didn't have as many models in it. And the best fitting model turned out to be a variable rates model. So the rate of phenotypic change per unit time is variable. It's not consistent across the tree, and it produces this tree that I've put here. I don't know how. I hope you can all see it because it's the blue on the black background isn't working very well. But the branch lengths that you see there are actually, it's not time. That's actually evolutionary rate. I've rescaled the branches so that you can see which ones are evolving more quickly. The longer branches with the hot colours are evolving faster. The shorter branches with the cool colours are evolving more slowly. And you see this sort of pattern that the larger, more inclusive branches are evolving more slowly, and the faster, more rapidly evolving branches are limited to small clades and perhaps even to single taxa. And I'm interpreting this as a sign of kind of a punctuated equilibrium model of evolution, that we've got long periods of relative stasis and lack of activity that's being interrupted by these short bursts of violence. So it's almost like the evolution is static. It's not moving around very much, except periodic shifts, perhaps environmental changes, that are creating these sort of jumps in evolution that don't last very long. There's also considerable support for an Ornstein-Uhlenbeck model. This is where a phenotype is constrained about an optimum. The Ornstein-Uhlenbeck model presents a problem because it's very prone to false positives. I'm not saying it doesn't exist, it's just extremely difficult to distinguish from a Brownian motion model. So that support needs to be considered with a great deal of caution. But these rescaling values, so the numbers I've used to actually use from the model, which I've used to set these branch lengths, can actually also be plotted through time in the same way I did with body size. And that's what I've done here. This is the same thing where we've got this delta 18O values for temperature on the bottom, and then here is a smoothed curve of rates of body size evolution. And here's a simple regression analysis. Again, high rates of high correlation between rates of body size evolution and temperature. And again, it's positive. So increasing rates of evolution occur with increased delta 18O, that is increased cooling. So when it gets colder, rates of crocodylomorph body size evolution goes up. And I think what's going on here reflects what Paul Markwick and colleagues found out in the 90s, that crocodylomorph physiology and evolution is constrained by temperature. In this case, they seem to be getting bigger when it gets cooler, and they think this is to do with body size surface area to volume ratios. That is, that the surface area is relatively smaller if they're bigger, and that helps them retain body heat as temperatures drop. And I see there's actually real cause for environmental concern about this. I mean, crocodiles are already becoming invasive species in certain parts of the world because as temperatures warm up, their habitable range is getting wider. Yes, as for example, crocodiles that are in farms, sometimes they escape and now they're establishing themselves as invasive species in certain ecosystems. But also if there's this connection with body size, which my work seems to be indicating, crocodile prey choice is linked with body size. They attack bigger things if they can tackle it, essentially. So the bottom line seems to be that if temperatures go up, then average crocodile body size might go down, and then the predation pressure they present in an ecosystem might shift, and that's going to have untold consequences to food webs where crocodiles are natively present. Just to wrap up, body size evolution in crocodile seems to be fitting a variable rate model. Body size and rates of body size evolution increases with cooling. Higher evolutionary rate is limited to less inclusive clade, sort of a punctuated equilibrium court jester type of model. Yes, I think that about covers it. So thank you very much for listening. You've been a wonderful audience. Does anyone have any questions for me?